Have you heard about a Japanese millionaire who hid a dark secret for decades? A man who used his fortune and influence to commit horrible crimes without getting caught, until one mistake put everything at risk. What seemed to be a simple disappearance revealed a web of horror, obsession, and impunity that shocked Japan and the world. In this video, we will dive into the case of Joji Obara, a relentless predator with a number of victims that may exceed 400. But how did he manage to act for so long without being discovered? And how was he finally brought to justice? Stay with me until the end, because this story is full of frightening twists. By the way, are you already subscribed to the channel? If not, take the opportunity now to subscribe and activate the bell to not miss any shocking case like this one. Born on August 10, 1952 as Kim Sung-jong, Joji Obara came into the world during a period of intense social and economic transformations in post-war Japan. The son of Korean immigrant parents who sought a better life in the land of the rising sun, his early life contrasted dramatically with the dark destiny he would bring to his future victims. While many Japanese and immigrant families struggled to rebuild their lives after the devastation of World War II, Obara's family experienced a meteoric rise in the socioeconomic scale. His father, who initially worked as a simple scrap collector on the streets of Osaka, demonstrated a remarkable talent for business and a fierce ambition. In a few years, the family patriarch transformed his modest beginnings into a diversified empire of enterprises. His businesses included several high-value real estate properties in Osaka and Tokyo, a fleet of taxi companies operating in major metropolitan areas, and numerous pachinko houses, establishments with vertical pinball machines, extremely popular in Japan and frequently associated with large money movements. The mansion where Obara grew up had a complete staff of employees, a luxury reserved only for the most privileged elite of Japanese society. While children his age attended common public schools, young Kim Sung-jong was enrolled in the most prestigious private educational institutions available. At 6 years of age, Obara was already attending an elite private school in Tokyo, where he received exclusive educational attention. His daily routine was rigidly structured to maximize his intellectual development. 3 private tutors awaited him daily after regular classes. On Saturdays, he dedicated himself exclusively to the intensive study of music. On Sundays, he received additional classes in various academic disciplines. This intensive educational immersion resulted in a young man fluent in several languages and educated in various areas of knowledge. At 15, he reached a significant milestone by entering the preparatory school of Yokohama, considered the most elitist in all of Japan. To facilitate this educational transition, his father did not hesitate to acquire a mansion on the outskirts of Tokyo, specifically so that his son could reside close to the institution. Young Obara lived practically alone in this property, accompanied only by employees hired to attend to his needs. Obara's privileged life took a dramatic turn when he was only 17 years old. His father, then 44, died suddenly during a trip to Hong Kong. The exact circumstances of this death remain shrouded in mystery to this day, fueling speculation about possible connections with criminal organizations. Subsequent investigations and reports from people close to the family strongly suggested that the patriarch's business empire maintained substantial links with the Yakuza, the Japanese mafia. These connections potentially included money laundering through pachinko establishments, real estate operations facilitated by intimidation and other illicit methods, and protection businesses involving his taxi companies. Regardless of the nebulous circumstances surrounding his father's death, the immediate consequence for Obara was the transfer of a colossal fortune. Overnight, at 17, he became heir to an estate estimated at $20 million, a value that, adjusted for inflation to current standards, would represent a significantly larger sum. After inheriting this vast fortune, Obara continued with his studies at the prestigious Keio University, one of the oldest and most respected educational institutions in Japan. There, he dedicated himself to the simultaneous study of politics and law, building a knowledge base that he would later use to manipulate and evade the judicial system. During this university period, he made a decision that reflected his desire to distance himself from his Korean origins and fully integrate into Japanese society. He initiated the process to become a naturalized citizen of Japan. As part of this identity transformation, he formally abandoned his birth name, Kim Sung-jong, initially adopting the name Siho Hashiyama and later Joji Obara. This change was not merely bureaucratic, but represented a deliberate attempt to escape any potential discrimination against Koreans still prevalent in Japanese society at the time. With his new identity established and almost unlimited financial resources at his disposal, Obara began to explore the world beyond Japanese borders. He became fluent in English and spent extended periods living in the United States and Sweden. During these stays abroad, Obara developed problematic habits that would later fuel his crimes. He became a habitual user of recreational drugs. He developed a particular obsession with Western women, which evolved from fascination to fetish, and he began to frequent exclusive nighttime environments, where his money guaranteed him access and an appearance of respectability. This period of international travel and experimentation coincided with the beginning of his attempts to modify his physical appearance. Extremely self-conscious about his Korean facial features and his relatively short stature, Obara underwent plastic surgery around the eyes to appear more Japanese, began to wear shoes with elevated inner heels to compensate for his height of 1 meter and 65 centimeters, and unsuccessfully attempted to use growth hormones to increase his stature. These physical transformations, combined with his change of legal identity and his abundant financial resources, created the public persona that Obara would maintain for the rest of his life. A carefully constructed facade that would hide the disturbing reality of his criminal activities for decades. This obsession with appearance was also manifested in his social behavior. Obara rarely allowed photographs of himself to be taken, with only 3 grainy images of him known to exist. In public, he frequently hid his eyes behind dark glasses, avoiding the scrutiny of others. His search for acceptance and admiration reflected a deep inner void that he tried to fill with external symbols of success and power. During the Japanese economic explosion of the 80s, Obara took advantage of the favorable moment to multiply his already substantial fortune. Through aggressive real estate speculation and timely investments, he expanded his assets to approximately $45 million. This period represented the peak of the so-called Japanese economic miracle, when the country was on its way to possibly becoming the largest world economy, surpassing even the United States. The atmosphere in Japan during this time was often compared to that portrayed in the film The Wolf of Wall Street. Extravagant parties, ostentatious spending, and excesses of all kinds were common among the country's financial elite. Obara immersed himself completely in this lifestyle, frequenting exclusive clubs almost daily, where he spent exorbitant amounts on alcoholic beverages, sometimes reaching the absurdity of consuming cocktails sprinkled with genuine gold dust. His obsession with flaunting wealth manifested in the impressive collection of luxury vehicles he maintained, including a Maserati, a Ferrari, and a Rolls-Royce Silver Cloud, external symbols of the status he desperately sought to maintain in the eyes of high society. However, behind this display of opulence persisted the same lonely man from childhood, now an adult, residing alone in his mansion, without genuine relationships or significant emotional connections. His only constant companion was Irene, a German shepherd for whom he showed deep affection, going to the point of having a life-size statue of the animal built in the garden of his property. This relationship with the dog possibly represented the only healthy emotional bond in his life, a stark contrast to his predatory interactions with human beings. The collapse of the Japanese economic bubble in the early 90s hit Obara with devastating force. What previously seemed like infinite economic growth proved unsustainable. Real estate prices plummeted, and the entire country entered a prolonged recession. Suddenly, Obara found himself indebted and unable to sustain the extravagant lifestyle he had built. In a particularly revealing episode of the magnitude of his financial problems, his mother had to provide him with the equivalent of $33 million to settle a debt, possibly related to criminal organizations, given the extent of the amount involved. Refusing to accept this new financial reality, he turned to increasingly obscure activities to maintain appearances. He established deeper connections with the Yakuza, offering his real estate businesses as a facade for money laundering operations. This partnership with organized crime, although providing him with some financial relief, was far from restoring his previous economic power. While his luxurious mansion gradually deteriorated due to lack of adequate maintenance, his luxury automobiles remained parked with flat tires, unusable but still visible to impress occasional visitors. Obara insisted on maintaining these empty symbols of a status he no longer possessed, a disturbing metaphor for the carefully constructed illusion that concealed his true nature. This contrast between appearance and reality became a recurring theme in Obara's life. To the outside world, he presented himself as a sophisticated and successful millionaire. To his victims, he revealed himself as a meticulous predator. Joji Obara's criminal tendencies emerged long before his acts became publicly known. Even in his late teens, while externally appearing to be a privileged heir attending elite universities, Obara was already cultivating deeply disturbing thoughts. His personal diaries, discovered years later by authorities, revealed a psyche tormented by misogynistic hatred and violent fantasies. In these notebooks, which he began to keep since the 70s, he wrote alarming statements such as, "Women are good only for sex," "I will lie about women," and "I will seek revenge on the world." As he advanced into his 20s, his notes became even more disturbing. A particularly revealing phrase in his diaries, "I cannot make women conscious," demonstrated the development of a specific and dangerous fetish, sexual attraction to women in a state of unconsciousness. This paraphilia, although rare, found space in certain marginal environments of Tokyo, where there were specialized establishments in which sex workers simulated being asleep or unconscious for clients with such preferences. For Obara, however, simulation was not enough. His fantasies required victims genuinely incapable of consenting or resisting. Thus, he developed a meticulous criminal methodology that he would follow with minor variations for almost 3 decades. The first documented attack occurred when a young woman, whose identity was never publicly revealed, accepted an invitation to visit his residence after meeting him at a nightclub. The pattern was established there. Obara frequented sophisticated nightclubs in areas such as Roppongi and Ginza, districts known for Tokyo's vibrant nightlife. Using his considerable wealth as bait, he impressed potential victims by buying expensive drinks, offering luxurious gifts, and displaying an apparently refined lifestyle. After establishing a false impression of safety and trust, he invited women to continue the night at his residence. Once in his territory, Obara skillfully administered incapacitating substances in his victims' drinks, initially pharmaceutical sleeping pills, but soon discovering the effectiveness of chloroform for his criminal purposes. When the woman lost consciousness, he sexually assaulted her, satisfying his disturbing fantasies without any consideration for the physical and psychological damage inflicted. The next day, when his victims woke up disoriented, confused, and often sick due to the side effects of the drugs, Obara fabricated plausible explanations. Typically, he suggested that they had drunk excessively or suffered some reaction to alcohol. Most women, although suspecting that something terrible had occurred, found themselves in a vulnerable position. Many worked illegally in Japan with tourist visas. Others feared social stigma or simply did not trust that they would be taken seriously by the authorities. This last fear, unfortunately, proved to be well-founded. The few women who gathered courage to report Obara to the police faced disbelief and indifference, especially when identified as foreigners or workers in the adult entertainment industry. This systemic failure allowed Obara to continue his crimes with impunity, refining his techniques and expanding his reach over the years. Initially, his victims were predominantly Japanese, women he met in his social life or in local nighttime establishments. However, as his international travels exposed him to different cultures, Obara developed a specific preference for Western women, particularly those with blonde hair. This fixation reflected not only aesthetic preferences, but possibly also a complex intertwining of his feelings of ethnic inadequacy, his desire to conquer the exotic, and a distorted perception that foreigners could be more vulnerable victims in the Japanese context. The impunity with which he operated for years fueled a growing audacity. From opportunistic aggressions, he evolved to meticulously planned attacks. With each successful crime, his confidence increased, as did his conviction of being above the law, a mentality reinforced by each filed complaint, each abandoned investigation, and each victim silenced by fear or shame. As the years passed and his confidence grew, Joji Obara transformed his attacks from opportunistic to sophisticated and meticulously orchestrated operations. Unsatisfied with simply perpetrating his aggressions, he developed a compulsive need to document them. This disturbing evolution led him to convert one of the rooms of his apartment into an elaborate filming studio, a chamber of horrors designed specifically for his criminal purposes. This macabre space contained professional equipment that reflected both his obsession and his financial resources. High-quality video cameras mounted on strategically positioned tripods, professional lighting carefully installed to capture every detail, duplicate monitors that allowed him to watch both conventional pornography and live images of his own aggressions simultaneously. One of the most disturbing elements of the setup were hooks fixed to the ceiling, specifically installed to suspend the legs of unconscious victims during the attacks. When he appeared in the recordings, Obara frequently wore a Zorro-style mask that partially covered his face, a bizarre detail that raised questions among investigators about whether he intended to hide his identity in the recordings or if the accessory constituted another element of his perverse fantasies. The recordings followed a consistent pattern. Initial scenes showed the victim conscious, usually smiling and talking, creating a shocking contrast with the following images in which the same woman appeared unconscious and vulnerable. Parallel to the visual archive, Obara maintained detailed written records of his aggressions, developing an almost clinical coding system to catalog his crimes. In chronologically organized notebooks, he used abbreviations such as CROFT, meaning chloroform, followed by the year and a sequential number representing the victim. These entries later allowed investigators to identify the scale of his crimes, more than 400 victims over 3 decades. With the coldness of a perverse scientist, Obara noted observations about the effectiveness of the different sedation methods he employed. Entries such as good sleeping pill or bad chloroform. She ended up vomiting a lot, revealed his continuous experimentation with drugs and dosages, always seeking to perfect his criminal method. This meticulous documentation reflected a distorted analytical mentality, evaluating techniques and results as if conducting some kind of dark research. The aggressions frequently extended for alarming periods. Some recordings lasted up to 12 consecutive hours. To remain active during these prolonged sessions, it is suspected that he used stimulants, although specific records of his own drug consumption during the attacks remain incomplete. When the victims finally awoke, often between 24 and 48 hours after the initial aggression, they found themselves in a state of extreme disorientation. The side effects of chloroform and other incapacitating drugs caused severe nausea, vomiting, tremors, and mental confusion. In these moments of vulnerability, Obara implemented the final phase of his plan, psychological manipulation. With apparently genuine conviction, he explained that the victim's debilitated condition was the result of excessive alcohol consumption or an adverse reaction to some substance she herself had voluntarily ingested. In some cases, he went so far as to demonstrate false concern, offering to care for the woman until she recovered. This performance of solicitude composed the final picture of his elaborate theater of deception. The prolonged interval of unconsciousness, combined with the absence of memory of what occurred and the severe physical symptoms experienced during recovery, created a situation of extreme psychological vulnerability for the victims. Many questioned their own perceptions and memories, a common phenomenon in severe trauma. Others intuitively felt that something terrible had occurred, but lacked concrete evidence or specific memories to fully process the event. The sophistication of Obara's crimes was not limited to technical and documentary aspects. He also developed deliberate strategies to select victims who would be less likely to report the aggressions or be taken seriously if they did. Foreign women with irregular migration status, professionals from the adult entertainment industry, and short-stay tourists constituted preferential targets precisely because of their precarious position in Japanese society. When occasionally a victim overcame all these obstacles and tried to report him, Obara relied on his privileged social status, substantial financial resources, and influential connections to neutralize the accusations. The combination of these factors created a shield of impunity that allowed his crimes to become increasingly elaborate and frequent over the years, elevating his confidence to levels of dangerous arrogance that would eventually contribute to his downfall. After Lucy Blackman's disappearance on the first day of July 2000, her whereabouts remained a distressing mystery for more than 7 months, while her family conducted a tireless search campaign. The truth about her fate finally emerged in February 2001, revealing a sequence of brutal events that shocked both Japan and the United Kingdom. When Japanese authorities demonstrated reluctance to seriously investigate Lucy Blackman's disappearance, her family decided to take extraordinary measures. Tim Blackman, Lucy's father, transformed his despair into a meticulously organized campaign that would eventually expose one of the most prolific serial predators in modern Japan. The initial indifference of Tokyo police reflected deeply rooted institutional prejudices against foreigners working as hostesses. The suggestion that Lucy had simply run away or joined a cult demonstrated the systematic marginalization of these women in the Japanese legal system. Refusing to accept this indifference, Tim Blackman mobilized impressive resources, including substantial funding from British magnate Richard Branson of Virgin, to establish a private search operation of unprecedented scale. The campaign quickly transcended borders and captured diplomatic attention at the highest level. A fortuitous coincidence, the official visit of British Prime Minister Tony Blair to Japan during this period elevated the case to the sphere of international relations. Blair, pressured by intense media coverage in the United Kingdom, directly mentioned Lucy's disappearance in his conversations with the Japanese Prime Minister. This diplomatic pressure transformed a previously neglected case into a national priority, resulting in the designation of 40 detectives exclusively to investigate the disappearance. The search infrastructure established by the Blackman family included an anonymous hotline for information, extensive distribution of posters throughout Tokyo, often facing bureaucratic resistance from local authorities, and the hiring of private investigators with specific knowledge of Japanese cultural and linguistic complexities. This multifaceted approach began to generate results when, protected by the anonymity of the hotline, other Western hostesses began to report disturbingly similar patterns of experiences with a mysterious Japanese client. Although the man used different names on each occasion, the physical descriptions were consistent. More significantly, multiple women identified the same seafront building where they had been taken for dohans before inexplicably losing consciousness. The growing consistency of these reports finally allowed investigators to triangulate a specific location and, eventually, a suspect, Joji Obara. A background check revealed a previous accusation of voyeurism. Obara had been briefly detained in 1998 for entering women's bathrooms to film women without consent. This indication of voyeuristic behavior, although treated with relative indifference at the time, now appeared in a significantly more sinister light. In October 2000, 3 months after Lucy's disappearance, the police finally arrested Obara and obtained warrants for a complete search of his multiple properties. What the investigators discovered transcended their darkest expectations. Obara's apartment revealed itself to be a meticulously maintained archive of systematic depravity. Approximately 400 videotapes chronologically cataloged documented sexual assaults against unconscious women over nearly 3 decades. Each cassette was carefully identified and organized, demonstrating a disturbing precision that contradicted the chaotic nature generally associated with impulsive crimes. Complementing this visual archive, investigators discovered detailed diaries where Obara clinically documented each aggression. Among the entries, a particularly incriminating one related to Kurita Ridgeway included the notation, "too much chloroform," inadvertently confirming his culpability in her death 8 years earlier. Forensic analyses of liver samples preserved from Kurita, previously misdiagnosed with hepatitis, revealed toxic levels of chloroform, definitively linking Obara to her death. As for Lucy Blackman, investigators found physical evidence of her presence in the apartment, including strands of blonde hair later confirmed as hers through DNA analysis. They also discovered receipts for highly suspicious purchases made shortly after her disappearance: a chainsaw, plastic bags, cement, and a camping tent. The implication of these acquisitions was terrifying, but Lucy's body remained unlocated. It was only in February 2001, 7 months after her disappearance, that investigators revisiting areas near Obara's apartment made the macabre discovery. In a cave on the beach adjacent to his property, partially hidden by an inverted bathtub, they found a series of plastic bags containing dismembered human remains. More deeply buried, they discovered a head with shaved hair, completely wrapped in concrete, an apparent effort to prevent identification. Despite these measures, forensic analyses confirmed that the remains were Lucy Blackman's. The meticulousness of the crime was evident. Obara had used the acquired tint to perform the dismemberment, thus containing evidence that could have been found in his apartment. This sophistication suggested a disturbing experience with this type of activity, leading investigators to speculate about the possibility of additional victims not yet discovered. Despite the mountain of evidence gathered against him, Obara vehemently denied all accusations, an extremely unusual attitude in the Japanese judicial system, where approximately 99% of defendants confess. His refusal to accept culpability initiated one of the longest and most complex judicial processes in modern Japanese criminal history. Japan's judicial system has structural peculiarities that inevitably prolong contested cases. Unlike Western systems with continuous jury trials, Japanese courts traditionally schedule only one day of hearing per month for each case, with panels of professional judges, not lay jurors, determining the verdict. Consequently, although Obara's trial technically lasted only 72 effective hearing days, these extended over 6 full years. During this prolonged period, Obara employed various dilatory tactics, including episodes of disruptive behavior such as refusing to leave his cell, undressing during hearings, and grabbing onto court facilities. More controversially, he attempted to exploit a specific cultural aspect of the Japanese legal system, the practice of mimikin, or condolence money, a form of financial compensation offered to victims' families that can influence sentences. Obara offered Lucy's family approximately $840,000 as compensation for her death. This offer created a deep and painful division in the already traumatized Blackman family. Jane, Lucy's mother, vehemently refused any compensation, considering it blood money and a calculated maneuver to obtain judicial clemency. However, Tim Blackman, her ex-husband, decided to accept the payment, a decision that generated significant public condemnation and alienation from other family members, including Lucy's siblings. As a condition for receiving the compensation, Tim Blackman signed a statement questioning aspects of the prosecution's case against Obara, an action that some believe compromised the judicial process. In April 2007, after 6 years of procedures, the court issued a surprising verdict. Obara was found guilty of multiple charges of sexual assault and the manslaughter of Karita Ridgway, but acquitted of the murder of Lucy Blackman. This controversial decision was based on legal technicalities. Although Lucy's body had been found near Obara's property and substantial circumstantial evidence linked him to the crime, the advanced decomposition made it impossible to scientifically determine the exact cause of death. Without this forensic confirmation, the court could not establish beyond reasonable doubt that Obara had directly caused her death. Additionally, contrary to the cases of filmed assaults, no recording of the attack on Lucy was found. The acquittal generated international outrage and severe criticism of the Japanese judicial system. Prominent public prosecutor Takashi Tsukamoto publicly denounced the decision, noting that in other Japanese cases, similar circumstantial evidence had been sufficient for murder convictions. In response to public pressure, the prosecution appealed the acquittal. In 2008, a higher court in Tokyo partially reversed the original decision, finding Obara guilty of kidnapping, drug administration, sexual assault, and dismemberment of Lucy's body, although technically still not of the specific act that caused her death. The Japanese Supreme Court subsequently rejected Obara's appeal, maintaining his life sentence with the possibility of parole only after 30 years of incarceration. For Lucy's family, this outcome brought partial validation after years of tireless struggle. Jane Blackman publicly commented, "This has been a distressing ordeal not just today, but for more than 8 years. We finally have 2 guilty verdicts and a life sentence. Truth and honor have prevailed, not just for Lucy, but for all victims of violent sexual crimes." Joji Obara currently remains incarcerated in a Japanese prison. At 71 years old, he continues serving his life sentence. The case left a lasting legacy in Japan, catalyzing reforms in the treatment of sexual crimes and the response to disappearances, particularly involving foreigners. However, for the hundreds of unidentified victims whose aggressions were documented in Obara's recordings, justice remains incomplete. Their identities, as well as the full extent of the crimes of one of Japan's most prolific predators, continue to be partially shrouded in mystery. If you found this story important, leave your like and share your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and activate notifications for more analyses of criminal cases like this one. Thank you for watching. Until the next video.